In the last few chapters of this strange tale, we posed the quest. How did black people become the face of HIV in the USA? And by reading between the lines of mainstream symbolism, we observed how big media, advertisers, along with science and health organizations directed the casting, with Magic Johnson drafted for the all-star position. Now we flip our focus from the symbolism to the science, if that's what it can be called. Because even with the last decode uploaded to the psyche, it can still be argued that Africa and Black America being the face of HIV/AIDS is validated by the scientific data. Any public official or professional could point to the viral stats published by the CDC or World Health Organization and claim the casting reflects the facts. But that's cool. I ain't here to debunk the alleged facts. I'm here to analyze how the facts became facts. If Africans and blacks are actually the most infected demographics on the planet, how did it happen? What are the events, environments, and cultures that caused it? And rather than take some unidentified lab codes at their word, the code will be testing the reported causes of HIV race to see if the science makes math. Hold on to your black hats, people. So how is it possible for a single ethnicity, alleged to be a minority in the country, be the majority carriers of a virus? So according to America's rockstar on viral science, these are the risk factors causing higher HIV rates in black society. And the first one on the list is already a red flag. How the hell can racism make people catch or transmit a virus? From one perspective of racism, this makes absolutely no sense. Racism as a feeling or a mentality cannot cause folks to contract HIV. It's materially impossible. However, from the perspective of racism as a system, it can legitimately deploy devices to infect people with illnesses. So is the CDC telling us that there's a racist system in place giving black folks HIV? That seems highly unlikely, so let's keep hacking. Another risk factor is homophobia. The CDC and other organizations claim homophobia makes more black people contract HIV. We can easily cause BS on this one because the aversion to homo lifestyles is not only a social trend found in black culture. The same cultural mentality can be found among any ethnicity of Christians, conservative Asians, and especially Arabs. What does people's opinions about gays have to do with them practicing safe sex? And just as feelings about skin color can't transmit a virus, neither can feelings about sexuality. Yet the poetic irony of this alleged risk factor is that if homophobia was such an issue, that would mean less HIV transmissions due to people staying the hell away from gay men who lead the pack as HIV carriers. Then there's the risk factor of HIV stigmas. This claim is that stigmatizing HIV as a gay disease leads to black people having more sex with HIV carriers they perceive to be heterosexual. Well, I think the stigmatizing of HIV as a gay disease is debunked by the CDC itself. According to the published report, homos hold the highest rates of HIV infections. So based on the data of the center controlling these diseases, HIV definitely can be perceived as a gay virus as much as it is staged as a black one. This is further validated by HIV drug ads that always cast gay men. In part 1, I highlighted how a majority of the faces cast in these ads are brown, yet they are also majority gay. So who's really perpetuating the stigmas here? People uninformed about HIV and AIDS or powerful organizations? And this still does not explain how stigmas transmit a virus. Now, when it comes to the next risk factor, I agree. The condition of poverty and its environmental impact magnifies any and every social ill, especially unsafe sex and drug use. And as we know, poverty and homelessness is not a black problem, it's an American problem. So if poverty caused higher rates of transmission, then Euro-American white communities will be equally at risk, if not more, due to higher population densities. But for some strange reason, poverty is not causing white people to get more HIV. I think somebody should ask why. And the final risk factor we want to analyze, barriers to healthcare. Now, the primary reason blacks would experience these barriers is said to be poverty and racism. Knowing there are many people who suffer in silence and solitude from many illnesses, I'm willing to submit this cause is valid. Barriers to healthcare, as well as reluctance to seek healthcare, would cause higher rates of HIV among black people. But we still have to ask ourselves, is this enough for black people to have the most HIV patients? And there's a few other factors we need to consider. Sex culture being the number one. If we analyze the sex culture of different ethnic groups, we will find that it's not black people who have the most liberal sex culture. European Americans and white peoples pioneered pornography and still produce over 80% of pornographic content. And if you've ever browsed porn in depth, you know no other ethnic group sex culture is as freaky as white folks. Whites have the privilege of enjoying open swinger lifestyles and other sexual liberties for decades, while other groups were still hyper-religious, ultra-conservative, or socially repressed. White men popularized sex tourism and have historically had the economic advantage to practice and promote it. This is relevant because sex tourism is known to spread HIV. Whites also own and control 90% of the escort industry. The sex industry is particularly critical because the CDC cites sex workers as high risk for HIV. Yet, conveniently, there ain't much data on the infected status of sex workers. Now, I'm wondering if that got anything to do with white women leading the population of sex workers and white men being the most frequent clients of prostitutes of any ethnicity. So as we can see, if sex culture was on the list of risk factors, it could be other groups more at risk for HIV, and it could be whites catching and spreading it the most. There's an X factor I noticed that is consistently ignored in these risk analyses, and that's the object of interracial sex. See, black people have sex with every other group of people as well as black people, and black people have the most interracial sex with white people. This has a very real impact on the data we see published by these health organizations. What this means is if black folks got all this HIV and AIDS, then white folks would again find themselves at risk due to the high amount of sex they having with black people. But the way the CDC and other organizations present these stats, you think black people, gay or straight, were only having sex with themselves. This is a clear example of why I call it biased science. The math just don't make music. And powerful dynamics like sex culture and interracial sex are conveniently omitted from the research. But there are other flaws in the CDC data. The same top risk factors cited for blacks are cited for gays, Hispanics, and sex workers. So it's clear that these causes are not specific to any group of people. They can be applied to any group, including those not profiled. The issue with the profile is a major red flag because when you browse the CDC HIV stats, there's data cataloged for specific groups and not others. As a critical thinker, we gotta ask why. Even if blacks, gays, and prostitutes were literally most at risk, what does that mean to the white woman who wants to find specific data on her own group? Why the persistence to single out certain groups and not every group at risk? With the CDC citing whites as the third most affected, and with white America leading the homosexual culture in populace and politics, it would make sense for the CDC to have specific data for white America. Yet the center does not. No data profile for the majority ethnic group in the country. Once again, the math ain't backing the science. It's almost like somebody don't want their HIV stats out on Front Street. But why not? I think we got to take this decode deeper into the system. Now, as I pointed out in part 1, by casting blacks and Africans as the martyrs of HIV/AIDS in the media, no one would be surprised or alarmed if the media portrayals reflected reality. When you think about it, there's only 3 real mechanisms that would cause a single ethnic group to contract the virus more than any other, specifically a sexually transmitted virus. One would be if that group was significantly more sexually active and reckless than all others. 2 would be if that group was targeted through intentional devices. And 3 would be if there was a genetic trait in that group that made them naturally susceptible to the virus. Now, before we flip a coin on those last 2, keep in mind HIV is not a natural virus. It is a chemically engineered human strain of a virus found in animals. Human immunodeficiency means that there is a non-human form. The title also indicates the human form was discovered or engineered after the animal form. So what that means is, if a group of sub-Saharan Africans were biologically vulnerable to this virus, then this virus may have been designed for that effect. But these hacks have serious repercussions on the data presented by the CDC. Either the virus does plague black communities more because it's intended to, or the data is simply false. Then there's even a third possibility that both are factual, and this will ultimately make racism the very real #1 risk factor that the CDC reports it to be. Hey, at least they kept it real, right? But there's still the question of the suspicious lack of viral data on Euro-Americans and whites. Well, I say if you got something to hide, then something must not be right. And what's most likely is that the liberal, reckless, and even violent trends of white sex culture have caused their infection rates to be the same as blacks, if not higher. So with that being said, my black hat should have enough tools to keep cracking this code. And once you hack the code, stick to it.